Get on to a Zoom call with France.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Keep.
Right, good evening and welcome to this conversation. There's a lot going on across the world, but today we're focusing on what's going on in our economy. Now, the Indian government has put out its first estimates for the GDP growth for this year, and it has estimated that the GDP will grow minus 7.7%. Now, this compared to last year, where the growth was plus 4.2%. But really what we should be looking at is this yellow line. You'll see that from there it is, from 2016, where it was about 8.3%, it has been going down steadily till the 4.2 that I just talked about, which was last year. And boom, this year, because of COVID and the lockdown, we're at minus 7.7. Now, if you look back, the last time that line fell below the axis was back in 1980. So 40 years since we've had negative growth in this country. It's been 40 years. Also, we must remember that the data released so far on GDP contraction for this year in the first quarter was minus 23.9. In the second quarter, it was minus 15, and now at minus 7.7 for the whole year. It means the last two quarters have actually done better. We're going to try and figure out what that better is. But if we look at it now split across sectors, agriculture has grown by 3.5% almost. The mining sector has shrunk 12%. Electricity, gas, water supply, other utility services are estimated to grow as well. Construction has shrunk. Services, trade, hotel, transport, communication has shrunk by 21%. Financial services has shrunk by 0.8%. Public administration segment supported by government spending is down minus 3.7%. If we take a look at what the government has spent, and this is in the GVA, in the value, growth in government final consumption expenditures pegged at 5.8% as opposed to 11% last year. And capital formation, which is reflects private investment, has contracted about 14%. Now, these are the numbers that will be used to plan the budget. Remember, the budget's going to be, one half of it's going to be at the end of this month and the other in March. But we must also remember that this estimate of 7.7% takes into consideration the first 8 months of this financial year. So a lot of experts have said it's likely to be revised upwards again because November and December seemed like good months. Also, we want to know if the vaccine does come in, will that unlock that really pained services sector, and will that show us some sort of improvement? To help us understand these numbers, Professor Santosh Mehrotra and Ms. Mohan Guruswamy join us right now. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for joining us. Professor Mehrotra, you first. The estimate of minus 7.7%, do you still believe that this is, a optimistic overestimate? Do you think it's I remember you said that it's likely to be worse. Do you still think it's going to be worse than this?
Honestly, we don't know. Please try and understand that these are quarterly estimates are always quite a lot of it is based on projections. And this is an advance estimate. This is not nowhere close to the final number. So it's good news that the activities that must have shown up in the third quarter are suggesting that there would be the growth will be in positive territory in the third quarter. But the fact of the matter is that what is the meaning of the positive territory? I've said repeatedly in your program that this is a K-shaped recovery, where the organized sector, and particularly the top end of the organized sector, the corporates, are doing much better than those at the bottom of the pyramid. In fact, there's no question about it that the number of the poor, which has not increased for something like 50 years in our economy, the absolute number of the poor would have increased this year, and inequality would have increased for the reason that I've just said, that it's those in the informal sector who've suffered the biggest loss in jobs, and their incomes have declined. We know this. There is evidence to this effect. So it's not a broad-based growth. Yes, there is some recovery, and that's essentially what this is telling us. I think no government can take strength from this, for the simple reason, and this is my last sentence, that the government has failed the country in putting in place a fiscal stimulus, which is barely 2% of GDP, which is sort of nearly half of what we put in place in 2008 after the global economic crisis. And that crisis, as your numbers rightly showed just now in the graphic, the GDP did not contract. It was still very much in positive territory, and we bounced back and we managed 8% growth between 2004 and 14. So anyway, I mean, there's something to be pleased about from this, but very little.
Mr. Guruswamy, there have been, and I was listening to economists who work with various banks, basically talk on business channels, and they all said that when the vaccine does come, it will unlock a couple of the other sectors that are still subdued, things like travel, things like hospitality, and then we'll be back to where we used to be, and they're expecting these numbers to be revised upwards quite sharply. Do you share that optimism?
No, I don't agree with that at all, because the vaccine will start third week of January, and we will have only 30 million doses by May. And 10 million doses will go to the priority people, that is the doctors and nurses and all these people. And then you will have the senior citizens who don't consume, who don't save, being the next priority. So by the time it comes to the main younger cohorts, it's going to be May, June, that time. And this vaccination process will not complete for 2 years. So to say that the vaccine will come and therefore things will return to normal is just not correct. It's hoping for hope. But having said that, the economy will not keep sinking like this unless we get a second wave of this London mutant, which will be absolutely disastrous for us, because it will knock out large sections of the working cohort, make them ill. Because there's no social distancing, no masking, nothing but the name, at least still in this country. And that is bound to happen. It'll take people out of the workforce again. This time you don't need Modi to take them out of the workforce. They'll go by themselves. So I think we are looking at things which are quite dangerous. And therefore, we must have renewed efforts to slow down growth, spread of the virus, have social distancing norms, make masks compulsory, reduce gatherings, markets. People are having now 100% seating in cinema halls in Tamil Nadu. Absolute disaster. Going to sit in a closed hall and give each other the virus.
That was cancelled though.
Well, that was, I don't know if it was cancelled, but today they said 100% is okay. The point is that people are still gathering in markets, and there's no place in India where you don't crowd. So I think, there is going to be a second spread. The London virus has already begun to come here. Down in Hyderabad, we've had 2 cases already with the new mutant. So it's going to spread. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed on that. Economic growth will pick up, after being so down below in the dumps without any government stimulus.
Yes.
It's still bound to pick up because, people have to do something. You got to make a living. You got to go and, scratch the ground and do something. Something will happen. Agriculture, there's nothing you can do but grow and, and expect, your stocks to pile up or the government to buy your stocks or somebody to buy your stocks. So there'll be a attraction towards growth. Construction is picking up, but not as fast as it should.
Well, yes. And this is my next question to the both of you. Professor Mehrotra, you first. We have a union budget announcement coming up towards the end of this month, and we understand the team has begun working on it already. It is obviously going to be a special budget this time because it is an opportunity for the government to fix, to some extent, what's wrong with the economy or to try and draw us out of the slump that we are in. Are you expecting the government to set aside fiscal targets and fiscal concerns and spend a lot? Because even in these numbers, it doesn't look like the government spending has been very impressive. What are you expecting out of this budget, and will that be the opportunity for the government to do something?
No question about it. I'm hoping for a lot, but I'm expecting very little. What do I mean by that? The way the government has managed the economy prior to the pandemic and the last 8 months does not inspire confidence. I'm sorry to say. The government needs to increase its borrowing. There is just no getting away from that. If you were to compare our stimuli with the stimuli of any major country in the world, and I'm actually doing a paper on this, I'm examining international data in this as to what the nature of the stimulus was. And I'm specific, on the monetary policy side, everyone did the same thing. We did pretty much what most of the other countries did. On the fiscal side, there is no country in the world which has done as badly as we did. Every country in the world put in a larger fiscal stimulus. So I'm hoping that we will learn to borrow and we will stop worrying about the rating agencies, because the rating agencies are going to downgrade us in any case if our economy continues in the way that it has continued this year, and it has been managed in this year. So it's absolutely critical that we increase expenditure on health. It's critical that government comes good on public expenditure, on infrastructure, which it seems it's begun to show some growth in this third quarter. There was an actual contraction of public expenditure in Q1 and Q2 when you would have expected the opposite. Q1, Q2, public expenditure contracted. It was mind-boggling that an economy which is in contraction will see public expenditure contracting when the government was claiming, oh, we are spending this much, 30 lakh crores. And thirdly, I'm still hoping that the government, in addition to public expenditure and on increasing health expenditure significantly, which it must, because if it does not, where are you going to get the personnel for putting in place a vaccination program which has to grow at a phenomenal rate? I think I've said this before in your program, that in a normal year, when we are supposed to vaccinate only under 5-year-old children, we managed to vaccinate only 65% of our 150 million children under 5 in a given year. So we have to do at least that much. In other words, we have to at least vaccinate 100 million people in this year, and hopefully we will do better than that. But that will not get us to the 60 to 70% coverage, which is necessary for getting to herd immunity. And honestly, we should be aiming at getting to herd immunity by the end of 2021. Now, getting to herd immunity cannot be managed with 300 million doses. 300 million doses mainly means 150 million people are getting vaccinated, which is literally about 15% of our country's population, not the 65 that I'm talking about. So you see what the nature of the challenge is. We better make sure that the Covaxin, the Covaxin, which is the ICMR one, the Bharat Biotech one, goes through and demonstrates both safety as well as efficacy. It completes its third stage trials, and we may still not have enough vaccines. We may have to get more, and we will need more. So all of this has to be provided for.
Mr. Guruswamy, there's a question from Aman Peshawari who asks a question saying the biggest industries that provide employment, agriculture, textiles, I want to add construction to that, are not doing well. Agriculture's growth, according to today's numbers, is about 3% for this year. What is the government's plan, and what industry should the government be focusing on in order to turn this around? Mr. Guruswamy?
The biggest employer outside retail is construction. Construction employs 55 million people. This is daily wage labor. And you've got to get that going again. To get that going, you've got to make credit easy, to buy apartments, buy houses, and invest in that. And that will start rolling. And then you start moving infrastructure, because that also entails construction, entails, labor, irrigation systems and silos and all these things. Village works can be taken up. So, this is where Santosh said that, infrastructure spending has to go up, direct spending. Now, what the government is doing today, I was reading, is very worrisome. It's going to increase wages by 1 lakh crores again, to government employees. So 23 million government employees will get a bonus of 1 lakh crores again. And then Sitaraman will say this is pump priming. They can go and buy cars and refrigerators. So you get your K-shaped growth getting even further accentuated. Your real problem is the people below the poverty line, to get them jobs, the rural labor, to get them jobs. You're not going to touch them, and you keep going to look after the people who are able to look after themselves. So I think industry cannot absorb the slack coming out of the rural sector, because it's not big enough. You need old, dull, boring construction jobs, small retail, all these to pick up. Small retail will pick up if the consumption picks up. Consumption will pick up when people have money in their heads. So I think, you suddenly can't say that, I'm going to set up two car plants, because they'll hardly employ anybody. They'll drink in a lot of capital. Or a petrochemical plant, could take $10 billion, but employ 200 people. Will still be investment, but won't employ.
Right.
So you got to get employment going. So you look at industries with employment. And why aren't we getting the garment stitching people and the toy making people back into this country? We have to look at our labor laws. So you got to use this opportunity to make things easier for employers to employ people. Today, there's a disincentive to employ people. The minute you have a union, is seen as a kiss of death. So I think you've got to overcome these problems. Trade union militant, and the biggest trade union in the country, incidentally, is the BJP union, the BMS, which is very militant. People who deal with these unions say that they are more militant than the old communist unions. So you've got to get labor reforms going, which means that, it is not left to the employers to keep employing forever.
Well, Mr. Guruswamy, I want to ask a slightly selfish question here. There was at the beginning of the show, Professor Mehrotra noted that the upper end of the pyramid, corporate sort of formal organized businesses are doing well. It's the bottom of the pyramid that's not. But we do know that a lot of salaried people lost their jobs this year, and even more were put on pickups.
18%.
Yes. So, is that likely? Are those jobs likely to come back now? Will we see more employment?
People have realized. Now, I don't think work at office is going to come back either in the scale it used to be. Work at home, reducing overheads, all has begun now in a big way. And so, I don't think employment in these sectors is going to shoot up very, very quickly. And even if it shoots up, it won't shoot up to absorb enough numbers. Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, so it has to be calibrated now. And we're making the mistake again of looking at the stock market, 45,000 cents. Doesn't mean the economy is doing well. The economy is tanking. And this is, so it gives you a feeling of doing well. The people at the corporate end, you think our companies are worth more. But your company worth doesn't matter. It's how many people you're employing and what is your value addition. What is your profitability? Those things are not showing much improvement as yet. Even the big companies, the profitability hasn't really gone up. Because even this last quarter is still languishing. The automobile sector unloaded stocks in December to some extent. But that is not new production. New production hasn't picked up. So I think we'll have to wait now. You can't suddenly get back to growth within 1 year. It'll take time. We've been in a deep hole, and climbing up from 10% minus means that if you do 4% next year, you've actually got a growth of 14%.
Can the government, Mr. Guruswamy, afford tax cuts in this budget? Because the government also needs money to spend.
Government can't afford tax cuts. Government should not give tax cuts. Who gets the tax cuts? Who gets the tax cuts? People who have money get tax cuts. People who don't have money get nothing. And this is time to reverse that process. I'm even suggesting that government employees should take a wage cut. That, take out leave travel concessions, take out the linkage to DA. Well, the whole country is suffering, David. You can't have one lot of people living in a gated community, living well and happily. And businesses are normal for them. But everywhere else, there's pain and suffering.
So I'm actually looking at the Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Bombay Chartered Accountants Society, that have put out a wish list for the government, which they do every year. One wonders how much of it is taken seriously, but they've asked for personal tax exemption to be increased. They've asked for revised threshold on deduction. They've asked for revised corporate tax numbers because, to make up for the very difficult year. So effectively, they also asked for reduced tax litigation, which everyone would be happy to see. Effectively, they're saying leave more money in the hands of the corporates and the salaried people. This way, there would be more money to spend.
No, I would give tax cuts like I would give a higher exemption of income tax for housing loans. Right now it's a ridiculous 5 lakh ceiling. In 5 lakhs, you get nothing. You allow a person to take, up to 30, 25 lakhs and give them a write-off on that. Give some depreciation on cars, on automobiles, on motorbikes. You do things, creative tax cuts you do. But you don't just say, income tax I'm going to cut and let you have more money. And corporate tax certainly should not be reduced because they have enough ways or enough loopholes as it is. The taxes foregone is so huge in this country, it's a disgrace. What we forego is more than the taxes we collect from them. Exemptions have to be weeded out, and you got to raise more. Problem is, get more money. To borrow money, you have to have more money. You just can't keep saying, I'll borrow money. If you're going to get a new stimulus, and you must have a stimulus in this budget. The stimulus is to drive the whole economy, open it up and spend on it, rather than spend on some people.
Well, let's take a look at the things that the government will need to spend on. There is the bill of capitalization of banks and the rising NPAs that they're going to have to figure out. There is the stimulus that you talked about. The vaccine, which back of the envelope calculation, we're talking about 1 lakh crore rupees, or maybe even upwards if you consider training people, hiring more people to get the job done. And of course, we would like the government to spend on infrastructure to create jobs. We would like the government, most of all, to spend on healthcare, because we have in the last 1 year discovered how poor our healthcare is in this country across the board. How is Ms. Sitharaman going to decide, given the fact that she has less money this year than she would have on a previous year, how is she going to decide where to spend that money? How do they prioritize?
Well, she doesn't decide anything. So the man who's going to decide, he's got a certain mindset that, you should not give anything free. You should not give anything which people don't earn. This is the old traditional conservative mindset. This is a desperate situation. To get out of it, you need to create money and spend it. That is the main thing that, this linkage, the gold linkage went 30 years, 40 years ago. Nobody does it anymore. You got to create money, and your money should be credit worthy. People should trust the government, trust the institutions to say that the notes they give is worth it. So you create money. You actually don't go out and borrow money in the market.
Well, alternatively, Mr. Guruswamy, the government could set up a private trust and name it the Budget Cares and have people donate money that they can use then to save the country.
Anything. We don't have a tradition of philanthropy in this country. But you've got $560 billion sitting abroad. This is the time to bring back about $150 billion as an India investment fund. Use that to invest in projects, to lend money to companies, to lend money for industrial projects, for infrastructural projects. You need money for that. But how you allot this money, who will allot this money, who will use this money, is now the big institutional question. What we see is every time something comes, it's ripped off.
Yeah.
So, like we had SEZ plan, totally got ripped off into a land scam. People got land cheap and they were wanting to sell high. So you've got to be careful on how you construct this thing. You've got to do it with,
I will ask you to come back on a different day and explain to us what right-wing economics is and how that plays on the government's decision on whether they should look after the poor or not, or how they make that decisions. And that's a longer, a longer conversation. But are you optimistic about the capabilities of this government to do the right thing in this budget, or to make useful use of the opportunity that the union budget this year presents?
No, frankly, I have no confidence.
Why not?
Because it's just not there in the mentality. If they had this in their mind, they could have done it last year or this year. The stimulus time crisis was on us, and you should have done it. It was just not there in their spirit, in their mindset. I've written about it several times. The problem is ideological, not fiscal.
Right. And also, Mr. Guruswamy, hasn't it now, if we make the media really, and I take partial responsibility for this as a representative of the media has made this big deal about the union budget announcement. What that effectively is a statement of account saying this is how much we made, this is how much we spent, this is how much but the decision making needn't wait for the budget. As we have seen, demonetization happened in November. The decision making could happen through the year.
Throughout the year, anytime. This whole business of this budget tamasha is only in this country. Nowhere in the world is this considered important and a big spectacle. And stupid speeches of 2 hours, 2.5 hours read out with very bad poetry interspersed. And it doesn't mean a thing. Because, it's a routine ways and means business that this is how much I'm going to spend this year, I plan to spend, and this is where I'm going to get the money from. That's all. This was all very good in the old socialist Raj, because you could use the budget to hit some industries, favor some, do all kinds of little shenanigans, get paid off for it. It was a big rent collecting activity. It's not so now because, your tax lines are all straight, 6%, 8%, 10%, whatever. There's nothing much you can do. There's nobody you can favor. People. These days you can only favor people. The new form of industrial licensing is control of the banks. Who will they give money to? But you have to now take the big leap and do it. Spend money, throw money into the economy, into the pockets of people. Ask them to go and spend. Unless you are willing to do that, this whole notion of that people have to earn their money. So you earn the money at daily wages of 225 rupees, then you can grow and become a millionaire. And the story of some billionaire is trotted out. See how Dhirubhai Ambani from a petrol station attendant became the richest man in India. all that is fine, but that is not the norm. It cannot work for everyone.
Okay, so now that we're already there, we might as well ask you the question. We had Gopal Agarwal of the BJP join us 2 days ago, where he talked about, we'll be talking about the farm laws, and he said, listen, we're capitalist, we're right of center. This is what we believe in. We believe in free market economics. Just to explain to our audience members what this right of center free market economics, what this theory is and how that plays out, especially in a time like this, when almost every economist in the world has recommended the government do direct transfer of cash into hands of people. Does direct transfer of cash into the hands of people stand against right-wing or right of center economics?
Well, direct transfer of benefits is, another form of liberal economics, welfare economics. That you put that money into the hands of the poorest. What you've got this agitation is, I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a deviationist on it. MSP is a form of subsidy.
Yes.
My problem with MSP is it goes to only one state or 1.5 states. 5 or 6% of India's people get 90% of the MSP. And that's a huge transfer of subsidy to one area. So if MSP is a subsidy, it should be spent equitably on all states. I say give every state an MSP quota. Why does MSP only take place in Punjab and Haryana and Western UP for wheat, and for rice in Telangana and Andhra, and the traditional rice growing areas like Tamil Nadu and Kerala and all have very little MSP. If you give MSP to everything you produce, then it's a form of DBT, direct transfer of benefits. Now, it's easier to give on an acre. You can give 6,000 rupees an acre like Telangana is doing, and say that slowly we're going to get off this whole subsidy regime of free power and free fertilizers or whatever, and then you get 6,000 rupees an acre for dryland, for wetland, and 8,000 rupees an acre for dryland. You do something like that, and I think we can afford to do that, and slowly dismantle. You can have your free market economy by transferring the money. Right now, what you're doing is you're giving that money to a few people, and you don't have money for capital expenditure. You've not built a single acre of irrigated potential in the last 30 years. All the new irrigation comes from tube wells, which are private. So you're running down the groundwater. What is a very inequitable system under the garb of, welfare economics? It's the welfare of some. Industrial India had welfare economics, welfare of some. Same thing with agriculture. It's the welfare of a few people. Now, this whole narration that only the poor farmers are sitting out in the cold, I don't really buy that. It was like Maruti workers going on strike. The highest paid industrial workers in the country went on strike last year, and the communist leaders were leading it. Gurudas Gupta was there, I was saying this is the working class. I said, this is not the working class. This is the new middle class. The working class are the contract laborers.
But the argument, now we're digressing, and I'll quickly bring it back. But the argument that the farmers were sitting there saying, do you want to make us as poor as all of the other farmers? Is that the problem with, if we are middle class farmers, is there a problem with us protesting?
We can't keep some farmers rich at the cost of other farmers. Why is there no procurement in Bihar? Why? Zero. Why is there no procurement in Eastern UP? Nothing in Assam, nothing in Bengal. Why? Don't they grow rice? Don't they grow wheat? Is there something special that only Punjab farmers? Today what is happening is they are importing wheat from Bihar into Punjab and selling it under MSP. It's a new form of arbitrage. And they say this is a higher productivity. Where is Bihar surplus rice?
But isn't the solution to that, Mr. Guruswamy, that the model that works in Punjab needs to be replicated in other states for other crops?
No, that is not a model which is working.
Okay.
That's a model which is ended up with 90 million tons of food surpluses piled up in warehouses, being eaten up by rodents and what have you. That is because there's an incentive to produce more. Your problem in India is not high production of wheat and rice anymore. The problem is excess production. You're incentivizing more production because you have nothing to lose. Every bag of wheat you produce is taken under MSP. So you keep producing more. And if you can't produce more, you buy it in UP and Bihar and sell it here.
Quick question from Anirudh Sabu. He says, is there any option to reduce taxes on petrol and diesel and levy taxes on gambling and alcohol? Will an idea like that help? I think there's already a fair amount of taxes.
Alcohol, this Telangana state budget, 65% of the state's budget comes from excise duty. We actually tax alcohol to the hit. And I don't mind if you have higher taxes. But that won't really fetch the central government any money. And your biggest problem again is that we have trade imbalances every year after year, trade deficits year after year. What does that mean? It actually means that your money is depreciating every year. The more you import and the less you export, you depreciate your money. And your biggest single import is oil. You can't, then you don't cover your oil with your exports. So, you have deficits and you devalue your rupee progressively. So you have to have now, there's a new kind of budgeting I'd like to do. I'd like to have export-import balances of corporates. How much do you import? How much do you export? Please give it in the balance sheet. So we will know who's importing and who's exporting. Then you could have a tax on excess on their own trade deficits. Like, there are businesses like in India which have come, like I'm very fond of those IKEA stores, which have come up in Hyderabad now and Bombay.
Yes.
Lovely stuff. But 95% is important.
Yes.
And and IKEA is going to get very big because there's good stuff being sold and fairly good prices. But if you have this model where you keep importing and keeping people happy, and you don't export, a time will come when the dollar will be equal to 200 rupees. I've seen the dollar go up from 8 rupees to 75, or 450 to 775. And so you can't keep doing this and expect to be rich. You stop at a certain parity and then expect to get rich. Whatever you do, your GDP could go up in rupees, but you'll still be poor in international terms, in relative terms. So you can't keep consuming petrol like this. You got to then, get off to electric cars, you got to get off to more solar power and all these things. Mercifully, we don't generate too much of electricity from oil, but you need to therefore use the electricity we generate to drive electric cars. So government should be looking at promoting an electric battery industry in India. You don't produce a single lithium battery in this country. Why? It's all an assembly business. Why can't we assemble here? Government needs industrial policy. Industrial policy is this, just like what MITI does. You work out the details in Japan, you work out the details. So this is what I need to produce here and get people to produce it here. What industrial policy in this country means is licensing, not actual production. People want to give licenses.
Giving license is a fairly lucrative business.
Yes. So this is hard work. This is creative work. Put people to work on it. And look at the ludicrousness. The hybrid engines of cars are taxed at the highest duty, 40%. When they're saving fuel. Why should an electric car be taxed at the same rate? You've got to look at all these things very creatively. That is, you have people with hands-on technical knowledge in the ministries, in the automobile sector, electronic sector. Now, Ravi Shankar Prasad says that, we will be a $1 trillion economy because, we will have 30% will be from electronics. What electronics are you going to make here? If you want the mobile industry to come up in India, you want the laptop industry to come up in India, you've got to think differently of making the raw materials here also encouraging people to set up, various supply lines to this assembly business here. We just can't have, in an iPhone, the assembly part of it, which takes place in China, only contributes 7%. 23% comes from outside, including 40% to Apple Corporation itself for its trademark. So, you've got to have people who are knowledgeable in industry, in technology, all working together. You can't have, it's not as banging talis, it's not technology.
All right, Mr. Guruswamy, I look forward to having many discussions with you in the run-up to what will be 2 parts of our union budget, which we're going to look forward to. We hope that the government can do creative things in order to revive our economy during our union budget. But for now, we're going to have to leave it here. Just a quick recap for those who've just tuned in. You're late, but also the fact that the government has put out its early estimates for the GDP growth for this financial year ending March, so ending in the next couple of months. It's minus 7.7%. If you look at that number, that dip that we're looking at over the last 60 years, it's not good. There could be any number of arguments as to what caused this. Obviously, COVID, obviously the lockdown. We haven't seen a dip like this ever, but we haven't seen a dip at all for the last 40 years. But really the question that everyone's asking now is what happens next? What is the government going to do? And how will the government work at reviving this economy? We're going to leave it here for now. Thank you for watching. Good night.